Where are the best, most rational Christian apologists? Theists seem to think we're going after the low-hanging fruit, but I'm struggling to find anything else. Where is it? So I undertook a journey to find credible apologists in popular culture, and so far, we're coming up with nothing. Where are these people? Please, somebody, point me in the right direction. So, this is my last attempt at finding any credible apologists, and I've already looked at a couple of other places. I've already looked at what Frank Turek thought, and other lists by other apologists were very similar, so I'm not just picking on him. I've looked at the top Christian apologetic blogs, and they weren't at all impressive. Now, I'm going to see what the best-selling apologetics books on Amazon are. Will these be any better? Will these be any smarter? I wouldn't be holding my breath. The one thing they will be, though, is more difficult, as we will see when we get into the list. But honestly, where are the Christian apologists who can come up with the evidence that non-believers are looking for? Do they exist? Where is the non-low-hanging fruit? Or is all of Christian and other religious apologetics just a pathetic waste of time? Let me know what you think in the comments, but until then, let's go take a look. Now, I said this was going to be a problem, and here's why. A lot of these top 10 books are the same book, just in different formats. These are the best-selling books, but they're not necessarily different books each time. So where I find the same book in just different presentations, I'm going to mention it, but then I'm just going to move on. And that's why I've had to go for the top 15 books here, because there are so many duplicates. But anyway, let's get started on the list. Number 1 is Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis shows up a lot on this list. Now, while I have this book on my shelf, and in fact, I actually have a lot of these books on my shelf, I've never been that impressed by it. It was written in 1952, and it's made up of a lot of other prior material that he wrote. It's a lot of claims about Christianity without being any actual proof of Christianity. Lewis writes a lot about beliefs Christians have, but nothing about facts that Christians can demonstrate. He talks a lot about morals, yet every bit of it is claimed as though it was true instead of showing that it's actually true. Now, this is common among Christians and other religious apologists, of course. These books are not intended to convince non-believers, only to make those that already believe feel good. Therefore, no thanks. Oh look, it's the audiobook. Like I said, there's a ton of duplication. Therefore, we just move on. Next, we move on to The Case for Christ by Lee Strobel. Now, Lee Strobel was one of the early adopters of the "I used to be an atheist" shtick, but he's not at all convincing. Nowhere can he show that he was ever a rational, objective, evidentially concerned non-believer. It's just a line to sell books. And he also pushes the fact that he was a former investigative journalist for the Chicago Tribune. And none of that is in evidence here. Instead of interviewing atheists in his book, he dedicates every bit of it to talking to other Christian apologists in a giant religious circle jerk. He never goes after any of them. He never demonstrates that he's critical of anything they have to say. Nope, he just buys into it all hook, line, and sinker. He goes into a lot of depth trying to defend the New Testament, while never providing any actual evidence that the New Testament is true. It's all faith, no fact, as I've said before. And this is incredibly common among the religious. So long as they believe it, well, it just has to be true. Well, what about the people who don't believe it? How do you convince them? They don't, because of course they don't care. This is another book that appears on my shelf. I've read it, and it wasn't at all impressive. And we're back to C.S. Lewis with a collection of all his theological works. Like I said, duplication. Let's just skip over this and move on to the audiobook for The Case for Christ. Holy crap, come on. Hey, it's a new one. This one is Another Gospel. A lifelong Christian seeks truth in response to progressive Christianity by Elisa Childers. Now, I haven't read it because as of the time that I'm writing this, it's not out yet. This is all pre-orders. It has a foreword by Lee Strobel, and you'll see that a lot. Christian apologetics is insanely incestuous, but this one is supposedly about a journey from evangelical Christianity to explore more progressive beliefs and conclude that evangelical Christianity is true after all. Except from everything that I've been able to read on this, that was never in doubt. Childers was never going to doubt her Christian faith. It was never about whether or not Christianity was true, only which particular flavor she liked the best. I can't imagine why any non-Christian would want to read these books because they don't address why you should believe in Christianity in the first place. That's just a matter of feelings, and clearly Christianity has to be true, right? So, whenever this ends up coming out, and I think it's sometime in October, I'm going to give this one a pass. Number 7 is Mama Bear Apologetics by Hilary Ferrer. This is how to brainwash your kids into Christianity. I've never read this one either, I don't really have any interest, and I somehow doubt it's going to promote teaching your kids critical thinking skills and introducing the evidence for Christianity and letting your child decide for themselves. Because the religious don't do that. It's all brainwashing. That's why childhood indoctrination is so important for the religious. Because it gets you past all that pesky skepticism and intelligence and all that kind of stuff. And if you look at some of the reviews, they're very telling, including one by J. Warner Wallace that pretty much says that it's the job of Christian parents to keep their kids from thinking intelligently about the crap they're shoveling into their heads. It's why the religious, especially the evangelical, are so terrified of education unless they're the ones in charge of it. These people are afraid of presenting a fair case and allowing others to make rational decisions. Because their beliefs are not rational. Number 8 is The Logic of God by the newly late Ravi Zacharias. I've read this one. There's no logic in it to be found. While this isn't strictly a book on apologetics, Zacharias still stuffs a lot of standard boilerplate nonsense in there. There's plenty of philosophical arguments that have already been soundly debunked, a lot of claims from the Bible with no proof, etc. He also spends a lot of time quoting people like G.K. Chesterton and C.S. Lewis. There's that incestuous apologetics again, but these things are everywhere. After finishing this book, if you haven't read Mere Christianity, now you have. Unfortunately, as with most of the books on this list, it doesn't prove Christianity. It just assumes Christianity, which unfortunately isn't what we're looking for. Like all of the rest of the books, it was written for those who already believe, not to convince those who are skeptical. It's just more low-hanging fruit, and therefore we must move on to number 9. The Reason for God by Timothy Keller. This is the first book on this list that actually addresses skepticism. Keller was pastor at the Redeemer Presbyterian Church of Manhattan, which he describes as a bunch of misfits, skeptics, and people who generally don't like Orthodox Christianity. But you know what they are? Christians. That's why they're in the congregation. Kind of funny how that works. I don't have this one on my shelf, but I have read it, and I was not impressed. Keller splits his book up into two sections, The Leap of Doubt and The Reasons for Faith. And in the first part, he gives 7 arguments against Christianity. Unfortunately, none of them are rational. They're all emotional because that's what Christianity is. It's all, well, I don't like Christianity because X, not, where's your damn evidence? A lot of the book is, as long as you accept the big stuff, well, the small stuff doesn't matter. But why should you accept any of it? Big stuff, little stuff, there's still no evidence for anything. You just have to have faith. And no, I'm not going to. Number 10, which is normally where we'd leave off, comes from an old friend. It's Tactics by Greg Koukl of those idiots that stand against reason. So, you know this one's going to be good, right? This is one I haven't read, although everything I've heard about it says that if you've watched a handful of his YouTube videos, you're not missing anything. It's just the same stupid stuff in book form. And because he's so utterly unimpressive on YouTube, I don't think we're missing out. He fails so miserably in his YouTube presentations that it's hard to take anything he says seriously. So you have to start with the assumption that he's right first, and if you don't have faith, you're not going to be convinced by any of this. In fact, I've seen reviews of the book that say that people won't be convinced by logic, as though he's using any logic whatsoever. In fact, the reviewers say that to believe, it requires the hand of God. No, you people require the use of Thorazine. Moving on. Seeking Allah, Finding Jesus. But what if you're seeking reality? Anyone who's going to go on a theological journey looking for a God already has something wrong with them. I've said it before, and I'll have to say it again, but the assumption cannot be a God. You have to be able to start from nothing and only go where the evidence leads. You can't start with a belief that there is a God. You have to start with a question, what is there? You can't start with a preconceived notion, and that's all the religious do. I don't care where I end up, so long as the evidence leads me there. But that's not how the religious operate, is it? They want there to be a God. They want someone to lead them around by the nose. Some of them aren't even concerned which God, so long as it's a God. And that's wholly irrational. I haven't read this, and frankly, I'm not interested, so we're just going to continue on. To another duplicate. This one is another version of Ravi Zacharias, because, it was crap in the audiobook. Might as well get the hardcover too, right? Yeah, no. Next. And we're back to C.S. Lewis. Seriously, are there that few decent Christian apologetics books out there? Because that's really what it feels like to me. Double next. Oh, good. Cold Case Christianity by J. Warner Wallace. I figured we'd get to this one sooner or later, because I have read it, it does sit on my shelf, but it's not an impressive book at all. It's actually a reminder of how stupid you can actually be in Christian apologetics. Now, for those who don't know, although I've talked about Wallace before, he's a former LA County crime scene investigator who decided to go full religious retard. Most of his book is just him trying to apply crime scene tactics to standard Christian apologetics with little success. He's just trying to put a spin on traditional apologetic arguments, and it's not really making them any better. However, I will say that if he treated his crime scenes as he does Christianity in this book, he deserved to get fired. He accepts things uncritically, not based on any evidence, because he has blind faith. And that would get you terminated if you actually did this for a living. He makes claims which cannot be validated and pretends, without proof, that just because it's in the Bible, it has to be true. That is not how any rational person operates. But Wallace is not a rational person. This is more of a reminder of just how far off the rails you can go while pretending to have a clue than it does to show anything valid in Christianity. My advice? Give it a pass. Finally, we get to the last one on the list, The Language of God by Francis Collins. Now, keep in mind, Collins is a brilliant scientist who became convinced that God exists because he found a waterfall frozen in 3 parts. It's an example of mental compartmentalization, where you can turn off the critical and rational parts of your brain and just believe in religion. But while people take him seriously when he's talking about the human genome, nobody bothers when he's talking about his own special spin on intelligent design. Now, he presents it far better than people like Henry Morris and Duane Gish did half a century ago, but it's still effectively the same argument, just using bigger words. And as we've learned from William Lane Craig, bigger words don't make for a better argument. Because it's still not rational. None of it is rational. He's just using the language of science to describe things that are not scientific. This shouldn't impress anyone. It's pretty prose covering up faulty reasoning for emotional reasons. I own this one mostly because I was curious to see how Collins would cover the subject matter, but it really isn't anything I could recommend. I mean, if these are the best books they can come up with, why are they getting mad at us? It isn't impressive, but then again, Christian apologetics are rarely ever intended for a non-Christian audience, are they? They exist to convince the already religious that their blind faith is well placed, not to take rational, skeptical atheists and show us that Christianity is actually true. But in order to come to that conclusion, you have to take all of the background on faith, and we're not going to do that. Why would we? That makes no sense at all. They can't prove the Bible is true. They can't show that Jesus ever lived. They certainly can't prove that God is real. And until they can do so, I have no reason to take any of the rest of their arguments seriously. You need to prove the core of your beliefs before we get on to any of the extraneous crap. This is all low-hanging fruit, presented to people who aren't thinking critically because they don't have to. And then we get attacked because we point that out. Maybe they ought to have better Christian apologists, or maybe they ought to have Christians that are smarter in the first place. Wouldn't that be nice? I'd certainly celebrate it. How about you?